Greetings, hockey fans, and welcome back to another episode of Let's Face Off. I'm Jim, and as always, joined by my partners Calder, Brad, and we are tonight very excited as we have a special guest with us, a Bay Area broadcasting legend and the voice of the San Jose Sharks, the one and only Randy Hahn. Welcome, Randy. We're excited you could join us this evening, and we're glad to be with you.
Jim, I'm glad to be with all you guys too, and I'm very impressed that you have a background of Lake Louise.
I'm very impressed that you picked up exactly which lake it was. I put it up there just in your honor, as it's one of my favorite spots I've visited up in Alberta.
As my dear friends in the UK say, thank you very much.
Excellent.
I think that's a perfect way to start this. First, Randy, thank you for joining us. This is amazing. We started this just a couple months ago, just as three guys getting together to talk about hockey, because we seem to text each other back and forth, and we said, why not just get online and talk? One of our first episodes, we actually talked about what got us into hockey. So we kind of wanted to pass that question directly to you as your first one. What actually brought you to the game of hockey?
Well, before that, I have to comment on your background too. You've got the Kraken hat, and it looks like a Dr. Evil lab behind you. What's going on back there?
It's just a office in my wife's office. I kind of piggyback on her little space here, so it's like a little common area there, lounge.
It's like you're working on conquering mankind back there, but good on
I
you.
try.
That's in his off days.
Yeah, exactly. That's his part-time gig. I was born in Canada. I was born in Edmonton, and hockey in Canada, at least when I was born, a long time ago, and I think still to a large extent, it's somewhat of a birthright. And it certainly was for boys back then, and I think it is for boys and girls now. It's a fabric of the culture of the society, and I would say most people embrace it. Especially, I think it's directly related to how cold it is where you live in Canada. The colder it is in the winter, the less things there are to do in the winter, and hockey becomes your passion. And it just, I was born in Edmonton. From there, I moved to the Yukon territory. So I, not exactly gravitating to warm climates until I got to California. But hockey is just part of your life, and that's what was my initial draw to it. And it really wasn't until later in my life, and maybe once my broadcast career got started, that I really embraced it in the way I've been involved with it for the last 30 years. But you as a Canadian kid, you owe it to being born in Canada. Hockey's going to be part of your life.
Do you happen to remember the first NHL game that you actually attended?
That would have been in Vancouver. I went to high school in Whitehorse in the Yukon Territory. And then I went to college at UBC, University of British Columbia in Vancouver. And while I was in Vancouver at UBC, I started working at a radio station in Vancouver. I had already worked radio prior to that, made some great contacts. And when I got to college, and I was only 17, I started college at a very young age, just because of the way my primary education evolved. So I was at UBC at 17, and I got hired by a radio station in Vancouver, which is a major market in Canada. There's, your major markets are basically, Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, Winnipeg, Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa. Those are the major markets in Canada. And I was already working in Vancouver at 17, working for a radio station. So it was a Vancouver Canucks game. It would have been in about 1978. And that would have been my first NHL game, and seeing that type of hockey for the first time. Prior to that, I'd been to hockey games growing up in Edmonton. The Edmonton Oil Kings were our WHL team back then. This is pre-Oilers. So there was no NHL team in Edmonton when I was a kid. And going to those games felt like going to the NHL because that's all we knew. And of course, those players would go on to play in the NHL. And you'd have to be a real geek to remember names like Darcy and Randy Rhoda or Phil Russell, but these were guys who made it to the NHL and played when I watched the WHL Edmonton Oil Kings. But it was the Vancouver Canucks in the late 70s into the early 80s where I first experienced the NHL. And that vintage of players would have been Ron Settlebauer, Thomas Gradine, Stan Smeal, Glenn Hanlon, players of that era. So that's where I first started watching the NHL. But fortunately, while I was first watching it, I was also working covering it.
Awesome. I can imagine Vancouver at that time was quite the hockey town. It still is, but what brought you or specifically made you engage the decision to come to San Jose, and what do you think it took with all of your years now looking back to really cement the Sharks franchise here?
Well, quick history of how I ended up in San Jose. As I mentioned, I worked in Vancouver in the NHL covering the Canucks. Then I got a TV job, my first breakthrough in television, back in my hometown in Edmonton. So then I started covering the Oilers, and that's when Wayne Gretzky was there, and Messier, and Coffey, and it was the Genesis years of the dynasty. I left before they won their first cup. I left for San Diego in '82. Did indoor soccer for 9 years on Prime Ticket, the station that at that time the LA Kings were also on. Was noticed doing the soccer on TV, was hired to do the LA Kings pregame, intermission, postgame stuff on TV. Again, when Wayne was there, so I couldn't get rid of him. He kept following me around.
Followed you everywhere.
And then my wife at the time got a job doing television at KNTV in San Jose. So we moved to San Jose, but I was still doing the Kings broadcast. And it was at the same time that San Jose voted on building the arena. So I eventually moved to San Jose, and that's how I ended up living in San Jose. Second part of your question, can you repeat? Because I'm not sure
what work do you think it really took to cement the Sharks franchise once it was founded in San Jose?
Well, I think the very fact that it was founded was all it seemed to take, because there were so many transplants in the Bay Area at that time from hockey markets, whether it was Boston or Philly or New York or Chicago or Ottawa, or places that are tech centric, that were attracting tech workers here, and they were coming from places where they were used to hockey. And San Jose, and we're talking about 1989, 1990, San Jose had the earthquakes, but the earthquakes weren't in a soccer league that it was strong enough, I think, that you could say was anything close to as strong as MLS is now. So the earthquakes weren't what you would traditionally call a major league franchise. So San Jose had a void. But at the same time, the majority of 49ers season ticket holders were from Santa Clara County at that time. A bunch of Giants season ticket holders, even Warriors, some A's season ticket holders were all coming from this tech hub, this developing tech hub where there was a lot of money and a lot of people hungry for sports. But San Jose didn't have its own identity in the pro sports genre. So when the Sharks were announced as coming in the first 2 years in the Cow Palace, and at the same time as the arena was being built, that to me was just all it took. People wanted to be part of this thing. And, the first 2 years at the Cow Palace, the first year was exciting because it was the first year. The second year absolutely sucked. I mean, they were 11-71-2.
I think that's
those
still
two
a record.
ties, though, those were amazing ties. This is pre overtime. Yeah. But when the third year came, even though they were coming off a brutal year, they made a splash by bringing Larionov and Makarov, and it was the newness of the building. I mean, you can open up like the Seattle Kraken. They might absolutely blow this year. They might be horrible. They might not come anywhere close to what Vegas did, but people will be excited because it's a new building and a new thing. And that's what we've had going into that first year in San Jose, which was year 3 of the franchise. And I think what solidified things was the new building in this affluent market. And then the team did what they did in that first year in San Jose, which was shock the hockey world. And I think to specifically answer your question, to knock off the Red Wings the way they did, sneak into the playoffs at the end of that year as the 8th seed, face the 1 seed, beat them. Coaches were fired in Detroit after that. GMs were fired. It was like scorched earth. This team from California shocked everybody. So I really think that series beating Detroit, that solidified things for a long, long time.
And we were all very happy about it.
Yeah, we were.
Yeah.
I just have one quick comment. Just sorry, I know you were next, Calder. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No.
Based on your Kraken comment, it's funny you said it's just going to explode up here regardless of what happens for season. Today because I'm on the wait list for season tickets. Unfortunately I wasn't able to get them right away, but I got an email saying that they're releasing tickets for the draft party, the expansion draft party. They gave us a little access code and said, go to the website to get them. Literally not even 10 minutes. It was probably 7-8 minutes later. I get there and it was already sold out. So it was like literally less than 10 minutes and it's just at a draft party. So I apologize.
Wait a minute, Brad. Are you telling me you didn't have access to tickets? Do the Kraken have any idea who they're dealing with?
Whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever. I wish I got an exclusive email to me, but I didn't. But still, it's going to be amazing. I'm excited for it, and it's kind of nice to hear what you were talking about. Like people are just going to flock to it just because it's the inaugural season. Even if we're terrible, they're looking for another sport up here. I know we have baseball and
right
football.
now.
But we lost basketball, so I think this city is definitely looking for another sport.
Yeah, I was in Vancouver doing sports on radio and going to college there when the Supersonics were great, and Marvin the Human Eraser Webster, Jack Sikma.
Oh yeah.
So we've gone through a pretty difficult last 2 years. It's got to be completely changed the way that you've done broadcasting, hasn't it? What's been the biggest thing for you?
Yeah, for sure. And when we stopped at the beginning of COVID, we just stopped because the Sharks ended up not making the bubble. So we never had to do anything inventive with the broadcasting for that season because we just, we had that final game in Chicago that night, went to St. Louis the next day, and then found out, you have to go home because the NHL will probably shut down for 2 weeks, which ended up being the rest of the year essentially. And then they resurrected the bubble in the fall, and Tampa won that Stanley Cup. This past season, with the 56 game schedule, it became a different animal. And at home, it wasn't so bad. We got to sit in our old, and if you've been to many home games in the past at SAP, we used to sit the TV broadcasters in the lower broadcast position, which was and is still to this day one of the best in the NHL. We got to go back to that one. They didn't make us sit up in the rafters where we've been the last probably 12, 14 years. So it was great being down there. That was great. Having the plexiglass between myself and Brett Hedican was weird. Trying to broadcast with masks on didn't work. I mean, we had to pull them down. You just can't do play-by-play of a sport that moves that fast where there's, baseball, and the pitch, and he fouls it off. It's a slower pace, and you wait, and it's just a different cadence. With our game, as it's so fast. To be able to do all that with wearing a mask, it was impossible. So that part of it on the home games was a minor challenge. The major challenge was when the Sharks played on the road this past season. We weren't permitted to travel because of the COVID protocols. No announcers were until the playoffs. And we had to call it off a screen. So that was challenging in itself. Technically, you can't imagine, especially when at the beginning the Sharks had to play home games in Arizona, as you'll recall. So it's a home game from Arizona, but it's being produced by the Arizona TV truck, sent back to NBC in San Francisco, mixing our voices with it there, and then sending it out to the rest of the world. The technical challenges were incredible, and I can't say enough how talented our people at NBC Sports California were to make that all almost flawlessly happen technically. And then for us just calling the games, it was so different because you're calling it off a screen. You can't see the back referee lifting up his hand to call a delayed penalty. You kind of have to guess that there might be a call. You can't see line changes on the fly unless the camera is pointing at the bench. You don't have a second angle. You just have the game action on the screen. But then there was a plus side of it where, and a lot of people wouldn't think of this, but when we're calling a game, especially when we're sitting way up in the rafters, which is the case a lot of the time, we don't look at the monitor. We're calling it with the naked eye. And it's often hard to pick up something like a puck off the post, or a puck that's deflected in front of the net off a stick or a crossbar. But when you watch the screen, you're seeing an image of a camera that's much lower, magnified. And so I found that I was able to pick up a lot of those things better off the screen than I was ever able to do live. And then another weird thing happened. Occasionally, the audio would be ahead of the video. So I could, like, it'd be like a half second, and you might have even noticed it, but you could hear the puck hit the post before you saw it. So you knew it hit the post. So there were pluses, but the minuses outweighed the pluses in calling it off a TV screen. There's no nuance, there's no atmosphere, and depending on whether or not there were fans in the stadium, and usually there weren't at the beginning, you had to maintain that level of energy, which is automatic when you're in an arena full of people. But when you're sitting in a broadcast booth in San Francisco and the game's going on in St. Louis and you're calling it, you're very conscious of trying to keep your energy up and keeping that level of enthusiasm going because you weren't there.
Yeah, that was gonna be my big thing. Is like, how was it to have no fans in the building for so long to try and amp yourself up?
Yeah,
But, I mean,
and the players have talked about how it was a challenge even for them, especially before the game, during warm up and things like that, where you start to get that buzz of being at the arena, and the music, and you see the people and they're holding their signs and people want autographs, and you can smell the hot dogs and everything else. All of that was gone for them, and we never got to experience any of that, being so far away removed from that. But I think the greatest compliment that we got, and we got it a number of times on social media, was that after the first couple of games, people had no idea we weren't at the game. So that's a good compliment when people feel like you're calling it the way they're used to hearing it when you're at the game.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I was actually going to mention that too. There's some games where you almost forget that you're not even in that same building because you're calling the action so good. So I completely agree with what they were talking about.
Thank you. And you know what, as somebody who does this for a living in broadcasting, you do lock in. Like once the game starts, and even if it's off a screen, you start focusing your attention directly to everything you can see, and you forget that you're not there.
So if we go back to actually you watching or broadcasting, whether it be watching a game or broadcasting a game, what in your mind is your most memorable game that you've ever been a part of? Again, whether you're broadcasting or just being a fan and watching.
Boy, see, now things are convoluted after Barclay Goodrow in Game 7 against Vegas, because for me, the greatest moment in Sharks history, and it still is, was Jamie Baker in that Game 7 against Detroit in 1994, because it was so out of the blue that the Sharks in year 3 were going to make the playoffs. And then as the 8th seed, they not only knocked off the number 1 seed in the conference, the Red Wings were the favorite to win the Stanley Cup that year. So you have this third-year team, and they beat Detroit in Game 7 in Detroit. So to me, that is still the greatest. That's the greatest. Jamie's goal was the biggest goal in Sharks history. I know Jonas Donskoi scored an overtime winner in the Stanley Cup Finals against Pittsburgh, but the Sharks didn't win the Stanley Cup. So you put that. For me, I put that in a little bit of a different category. So for me, that was the greatest goal in Sharks history. The greatest game in Sharks history has to be Game 7 against Vegas.
I was sitting on the edge of my seat for that one too.
Again, you talk about something that absolutely no one expected. In 94, no one expected the Sharks to knock off Detroit, but it took 7 games to do it. In that series against Vegas, nobody expected the Sharks to win that game, and there was only 10 minutes left because it was 3-0. We were getting owned by our new arch rival, and the drama and the concern for Joe Pavelski's welfare, and then him coming back to the tunnel, before the game ended to cheer on the guys. And to me, that is a new category of greatest game, greatest moment in Sharks history when Goodrow scored that goal in overtime, and the drama and the way it unfolded. And, another great moment game in Sharks history for sure for me is Game 6 against St. Louis in the Western Conference Final in 2016, when, I shed tears. I mean, I've been involved with this franchise before it was a franchise and trying to make it happen. And to finally sit there and watch the team celebrate that they were going to the Stanley Cup was a very special night. It was a very special night downtown in San Jose because the city went off. And so I will give it a particular order. My order would be Baker in 94, number 1, Vegas Game 7, number 2, and number 3 going to the Stanley Cup final for the first time. Those would be my top 3 moments, games, whatever you want to call it, in Sharks history.
You actually answered the second part of that question, and it was going to be, has it changed over the years? But clearly the answer is yes.
And I hope it changes again, because
absolutely.
Obviously the ultimate greatest moment in Sharks history is going to be when they win it all. And, I'm praying that I'm still announcing when that happens. I won't be announcing that game because it always goes to the networks in those rounds. But number 2, that I'm still alive.
At this point, you never know, right? Me too.
I mean, look at how long Canucks fans and Buffalo Sabres fans have been waiting for a Stanley Cup. Our fans are anxious because we've been waiting since 1991. They've been waiting since 1970. They've never won.
Just amazing.
Yeah.
And this next one, you sort of answered a little bit, but if there's anything else you want to add, you've been with the Sharks since before they were a franchise. It's very much apparent the success that we've seen Vegas have in their first few years as a franchise, and their fan base is showing it as well. Seattle's coming on board. What do they need to do besides opening to get out of the gate strong and build a lasting reputation for their fans?
Oh boy. Well, I think they've already gone a long way toward doing that with the way that they've launched. From what I've seen of the arena, of what they're going to do there with that, and the next thing will be, as we reflected on earlier, that first year is always, you're going to be a hit, win, lose, or tie because you're new, and there's fancy shiny toys like the new arena, and I'm sure it'll be state of the art. Hopefully the broadcast location is better than Vegas, which absolutely sucks. But I think that it's going to be about this expansion draft and how they're able to maneuver through that. And it'll be a bigger challenge than it was for Vegas, because Vegas took full advantage of it. And now, especially with the extra year, as you'll recall, of Seattle kind of delaying coming in, that gave them an extra year to get ready and get their arena in order and all that. But it also gave everybody in the league an extra year to prepare for how they're going to deal with this upcoming expansion draft. And, will they be able to pluck players like Marchessault and Carlson like Vegas did, and Riley Smith, and become key pieces for them? Marc-Andre Fleury, who some people in this league felt was his best days were behind him, and he just won his first Vezina trophy. Will they be able to do that? I don't know. It's gonna be harder. But if they're competitive in that first year, coming up this fall, that'll be great. If they end up, finishing at the bottom of the Pacific Division, that's going to set them back a little bit. But the way the Pacific Division is set up, I don't know how you guys feel, but this thing we just went through with this makeshift West, Colorado's gone, St. Louis is gone, Minnesota's gone. I mean, those are three teams that made the playoffs. They're not in this division anymore. Arizona, the Desert Dogs, who always give us trouble. They do. Like in the regular season, and I know they haven't had much success against us in the playoffs, but in the regular season, they're a thorn in our side. They're gone. They're going to the Central. So now we get Seattle in with LA and Anaheim. We could debate who's going to be more improved of those two. It's debatable, probably LA. But are they playoff teams? I don't know. And then you've got Calgary and Edmonton. Is Calgary going to be a playoff team? I don't know. Vancouver, maybe. They should be. Edmonton, I think, is going to be a playoff team. Vegas for sure. So it's a division where the Kraken could make some noise if they're decent. If they can keep the puck out of their net, then they've got a chance to hang.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of teams that we've all watched for the past few years, last year was not our best team that we put on the ice, I think, for the Sharks. What do you think was the best team that we've seen coming from the Sharks, and what do you think we need to do to get back to that level of team?
Well, the Cup team was obviously a well-balanced team, and I don't want to pile on people here, but I'm gonna address the position. And even in that year we went to the Cup, I just didn't think our goaltending was good enough. And in particular against Pittsburgh, we weren't fast enough. They were just a quicker, faster team. So maybe that's a little unfair to hang it on the goalie, because the goalie got us to the final. But the regular season that year, we were outscoring our goaltending weaknesses. We were scoring 5, giving up 4. And the last couple of years in particular, that has really caught up to us because we don't have the firepower to outscore our defensive / goaltending weaknesses. And, I think number one, we have to find a solution in net. And I think at some point, some of that solution might come from within the organization, from who's on the Barracuda now or who may be coming. But I don't think those goalies are ready yet to be starting goaltenders. So, and Doug Wilson's already talked about it. He's got to find a new starting goaltending situation, and whether or not that's a bona fide number one. And I'm just throwing a name out there, somebody like a Cam Talbot, or whether it's some combination of a couple guys that can patchwork it together. But clearly what we have now is not getting it done. And I think that we need that. Number one, we need way better play from our core. And that starts at Logan Couture, and he'll tell you he didn't have a good year, because he didn't. And it goes all the way through to Erik Karlsson. And if he's honest with you, he'll tell you he didn't have a good year, because he didn't. So can our core be better? And you have to hope they can be, because that's our core. And some of those guys are under contract for a long time. So, I think we have to be better at keeping the puck out of our net, but boy, we've got to score more. Our power play has to be a weapon again. It wasn't. It hurt us. And our penalty kill was good, but it wasn't as great as it needed to be to make up for our lack of power play. So there's a lot of moving parts there. And there's another more vague area, in my opinion, that got better, but still isn't there. And that's culture, team chemistry, guys laying it out for one another. Because, you guys know this is a team game. It's not like the NBA where you have 2 or 3 good starters and a good guy off the bench, and you can contend. You need 9 great guys, and one of them better be your goalie if you're going to contend for the cup in the NHL. And that requires players playing for the guy next to them. The player you sit next to, you got to make better. And Brett Hedican talks about this all the time, on and off the air. We talk about just like you guys do on your podcast, and maybe in your time when you're not on this, you talk hockey. And when Brett and I are on the plane, or we're having dinner, or if we're grabbing a Pepsi after a game, that's what we're talking. We're talking about the game and how to make it better, how the Sharks can be better. And Brett talks about absolutely having to be committed to the guy next to you in the dressing room to make him a better player. And I still don't see enough of that on our team. And I do think Bob Boughner got it headed in the right direction, because it got way off the rails the year before, but it needs to keep getting better.
I'm going to throw in a quick question on that whole culture idea. What do you think happened to the Sharks culture? It was such a strong, it was like known around the league as this really strong culture team. And all of a sudden, within 3 years, it felt like it kind of just disintegrated a little bit. Do you have any ideas of why maybe that happened?
The easy answer would be Joe Pavelski left, Joe Thornton left, Patrick Marleau left, came back, but he wasn't the same Patrick Marleau anymore. And I think those are valid answers, because those are the best players on the team. And did Brent Burns turn 35? Yeah. Brent Burns. And has Karlsson underperformed? Yeah. It's a cocktail, and that cocktail doesn't taste like it used to, because parts are missing and parts went sour. But you got to build it back. And this happens to every team. Culture changes, and the teams that can maintain that culture over decades, or at least over a decade, like the Pittsburgh Penguins. I marvel at that franchise. But there's kind of been a constant. You had the Mario Lemieux era, immediately followed by the Sidney Crosby era. And when you have great leadership on and off the ice like that, it tends to bring things together. And we had great leadership on and off the ice through the Pavelski, Thornton, Marleau era, and that era is over now. And Logan is challenged as the captain, and nobody does it alone, and neither did those guys. And he needs leadership from Burns and Karlsson and Meyer and and so on, and Hurdle, and so on and so on. And these young men have to learn how to build that together as a group, with the help of the coaching staff and Doug Wilson, and who he brings in to buttress the rest of the group where there's weaknesses. So it's easy to recognize that it's not there. It's really hard to build it back up. And to me, that's a big part of the challenge. The guys have to come together, and they have to play for one another. It's one thing saying, oh, it's for the fans and all that, but when you're in that room, it's why when the Lightning won the cup the other night, it's more than the other night, a couple of weeks ago, they stayed in the dressing room and they celebrated with their group of guys. And then they went into another room, and the wives were in there, and the families, and they didn't come out of the arena till like 2 or 3 in the morning. They had nowhere to go. They were there to just enjoy this together because of what they had accomplished. And that speaks to how important it is as a group, that it has to start in training camp, and it has to continue through the long year, and then in the most important time of the year, the playoffs. And that's what every team's trying to get and build. And when you hear coaches say, when the team's right, the coach has little to do, because all the problems get taken care of within the dressing room, because the guys don't let them grow to become big issues. Problems are nipped in the bud by the leadership group, and we need to get back to that.
All right. Well, Randy, we've met our time, but are
you suggesting we go to overtime?
We love overtime, but it's we want to be respectful of your time, and We know you.
Now we're good for a few more minutes, no
Okay.
problem. Although I do have some amazing DoorDash waiting for me.
Oh, ooh, excellent. Well, we might have to find out what your go-to DoorDash is a little bit later. Um, but I want to throw it way back in your career to when you got a chance to broadcast the very first Women's World Cup. And I know we've got the Olympics coming up, and that original World Cup team was such an inspiration for so many to go on to become the dominant women's team that it is today. Um, I know that I don't believe the U.S. played in that final, but what was that experience like calling the Women's World Cup?
It was a great experience. I called it with Ricky Davis, who was a defender for the New York Cosmos back in the day. For those who are NASL literate from that era, and we ended up doing the semifinal and the final. And the U.S. I thought they were in the final of that.
It's been so long.
Yeah, I thought they were against Germany, but it's been a long time. 1991. But it was a great trip. We had done a U.S. men's game in Dallas, and then flew the next morning to LA, changed planes, and flew to Hong Kong, which
Wow.
is like a 14-hour flight. It's crazy. There's like 3 movies, and then there's still 6 hours left on the flight. And then we did a quick overnight in Hong Kong, and we took this crazy little train to Guangzhou, which back in the day used to be known as Canton in China. And that's where the Women's World Cup was. And the journey was bizarre just to get there. And then to do 2 games essentially in 4 days. That was on the old Sports Channel America. Aside from the games themselves, my fondest moment was Ricky calling me after the semifinal, and it was in between the semifinal and the final. And he said, "You want to come downstairs and have lunch with my buddy and I?" And I said, "Sure." And we were staying in this hotel that was a FIFA. They took over the whole hotel, and it was very westernized, a Western buffet for all the meals and things like that. So I get down there, and I see Ricky in the back of the head of whoever he's sitting with, and I slide into the booth, and I look across, and I'm having lunch with Pele. Because Pele was on the Cosmos team that Ricky Davis was. And Pele was brought in by FIFA to kind of bring some profile to this Women's World Cup, the first one. They call it the Women's World Championship in 91. It wasn't officially designated a Women's World Cup, but it really was the first big one. So yeah, I got to have lunch with Pele. Had lunch with him. He spilled some marinara on his shirt. That was one of those wow moments, along with getting to know Michael Jordan when I worked in Chicago, and running into Muhammad Ali on the street outside the Fairmont Hotel in San Jose once and introducing myself to him.
Wow.
And then getting to know and work fairly closely with Wayne Gretzky. So that's my, if you're going to say who are the 4 most famous athletes you've ever met, Pele, maybe the most famous athlete in the history of the world, followed by Muhammad Ali, who might be right there with him, and Michael Jordan and Wayne Gretzky. So, but no, that was a great experience. And, it was China before China was really modernized. I remember taking a bunch of candy and bubble gum in my suitcase to, give to kids on the street, because that kind of stuff wasn't prevalent in China in those days. It's where you would be able to get $100 for a pair of blue jeans and all that. And of course, now they make all our blue jeans.
Wow. That sounds like an amazing trip. And who would have ever thought, you'd go to China to have lunch with Pele?
Yeah. And Brandy Chastain was on that team, but she was 17. She was not a star. Michelle Akers and Karen Jennings were the 2 stars on that U.S. team.
Yep. Wow.
All right, I'm going to finish up with one more question. It's kind of like a 2-parter we're going back to the NHL. This last year and the year before, during the season and the postseason, what do you feel that was the best thing coming out of it, like for the NHL? And do you think any of those things can come into the next seasons for us, like the divisions and the reseeding and all those kind of things?
I think that I like the fact that Vegas and Colorado developed a rivalry, even though they're not going to be in the same division going forward next year. I think that was big for the NHL because those are two Western Conference powerhouse teams. I loved seeing the New York Rangers kind of have a renaissance and bounce back and become a factor again in the Eastern Conference. That's just gameplay. The thing I liked most again about what they had to do was the series play, where we went into a city and played two games, in some cases back to back, or two games in 3 nights. The schedule is going to come out usually comes out right before the draft. I don't know if they're going to do it before the expansion draft or in between the expansion draft and the regular draft, but I think we're going to see those series in it. That's the rumors I'm hearing. And I love that. It gives a little bit of a taste of playoff action within a season. Way back in the day, in the beginning years of the Sharks, we had a situation with that, like that with Chicago, where we played them, I think, 3 times in a row, including one game when they used to do the neutral site games. It was in Sacramento. So we played Chicago and San Jose, played them in Sacramento, and then back in San Jose. And it felt a little bit like a playoff series. I think Andre Zuzan scored a big overtime winner in that series. And it felt like a playoff game, even though it wasn't. So I like that feeling, the whole thing of adjustments from the first game to the second. How are you going to beat them after you lost 6-1 in the first game? Are you going to bounce back? Who's your goalie going to be? All that. And I look forward to that. And it'll help the travel. You won't have to go to St. Louis twice on the years you play them there twice and once here. You'll knock it out on one weekend or on a Tuesday, Wednesday. And that'll help everybody, especially the Western Conference teams where the travel is always tougher. But to me, that's the thing I liked most, was clustering some games together in those 2-game series. I like that.
Yeah, I definitely think that was my favorite part of the whole season part. I think
that's gonna do it for us. Randy,
are you going fishing now?
What was that?
Are you going fishing in Lake Louise now?
I don't think they're biting right now. It looks a little still out there.
Yeah, it's very calm.
Yeah. But Randy, we absolutely thank you for your time. It was a tremendous pleasure having you on. We have all been hockey fans for a long time, and we know that just getting to share the experiences is part of the fun of the fandom of being part of a sport like hockey. So we really appreciate your insights and want to thank you for joining us.
Jim, Brad, Calder, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me, having me on your podcast, and looking forward to the expansion draft. See who we lose, we might get, and then the amateur draft. We'll have a first-round pick again, like we did last year when we got Ozzy, and we continue to build the foundation of the team again and bring those top-notch prospects in. Wish you guys the best of luck with the podcast. Be happy to come on again in the future, and go Sharks.
Go Sharks. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Randy.
you.
We're going to take a quick break now, and then Brad Calder and I will be back with you for the second half.